Welcome, everyone. This is the last breakout session as part of MIX. And my name is Markus Mielke. I'm part of the Internet Explorer team. And I joined Microsoft back in 2000. And back then, I worked on the DOM Level 1 completion and the web service behavior. And today, I work for Chris Wilson. So if you had a chance to see his talks in the morning. And now I'm responsible for layout, CSS, and printing in Internet Explorer. I'm also part of the CSS working group for over a year now, so working with all the other browser vendors on the latest CSS standards. So the title of my talk is Making Your Site Look Great in Internet Explorer 7. What I really mean is make your site great in Internet Explorer 7 and other browsers. And the focus of this talk actually will be around how do you enable rich standards-based design within Internet Explorer. For that, I will show you a little bit about how we prioritized the work we've done for Internet Explorer 7, what fixes and features we did, and how they benefit you in your design work, and what you can do to prepare your pages for Internet Explorer 7. I also will leave plenty of time at the end for questions, because I'm sure you'll have some. So let's just jump right into the demo. I know it's the last day at MIX, there's a lot of partying going on, so I hope no one has fallen asleep yet. So what I'm going to show you now is a page written in the spirit of ZSS Zen Garden. And it's purely done within HTML and CSS, so there's no JavaScript involved. So what you've seen here is a rich view possible now in Internet Explorer 7, and I want to highlight three set of features. The first thing you'll notice is, when I scroll, that all the panes around are actually fixed. This is a feature we introduced in Internet Explorer called fixed positioning. Now you can build frame-like layouts without the heavy lifting of actually using frames. Another thing I want to point your attention to is a little fading effect we're having going on here. So when you scroll, you can see how the text nicely fades away. And this is done through the help of alpha-transparent PNGs. And then here on the right side, we have live previews of pages. And this is done through a feature called call and hover on all elements. So what we actually have here is only divs, and as soon as we call hover, we bring up these hover effects. One of the requirements of ZSS Zen Garden is, for example, you're not allowed to introduce additional text into the page. You're not allowed to do new HTML. So what we had to do here was pretty much using background images on this div dynamically. And as you can see, you get to see these little yellow effects when I hover over them. So we can just change these background images on the fly, so no markup is actually touched for the presentation aspects. And as I mentioned before, the key of this talk is not just make it look great in Internet Explorer 7, but also in Firefox and Opera. Yeah, thank you. So I just showed you what rich capabilities are now capable in browsers using standards-based design. So let's talk a little bit about how did we prioritize our work for Internet Explorer 7. First, we listened to your feedback. And one of the very common themes was, wow, there are actually a lot of inconsistencies, a lot of problems when writing just everyday web pages. But luckily for us, there are great community sites out there who actually collect these issues. MayaWeb, Position Everything, QuirksMod, the Web Standards Project, to name a few, that really helped us in prioritizing what fixes we had to obtain. Next, we listened to your requests. In particularly, what are the top next standards features you wanted to see in Internet Explorer? And you might have noticed we are much more active in the community now. We started an IE blog a year and a half or so, I think, ago, And as part of that process, we're receiving a lot of feedback from you. Whenever we post something, or whenever I, for example, post something about CSS, I always get like a wish list from a lot of people saying, hey, this are the features I want to see next in the platform. And that helped us putting our plans for IE7 together. We're also more active in the news groups. We're having public chats every other month. And we're also much more active at conferences. Hey, we're here at MIX. Besides all these things we listened to, what it really boiled down to was that our folks were you. People who have to make a living out of making web pages. We really try to eliminate all these pain points which you had with Internet Explorer 6. So therefore, the focus was fixing the top pain points and adding the most requested standards features. At this stage, I also want to shortly mention why we didn't do, for example, fully ACID 2 support. Chris already talked about this a little bit in his talk in the morning. Our main focus was getting the pain points out of the system first, before we concentrate on a test case like ACID 2. We completely understand this intention, and we'll get to it at some point in the time. So now I showed you a little bit how we prioritized. Let me move now on to what fixes did we actually do, and what features are in the system, and what rich experiences you can build with them. So first I want to point to the page from Position is Everything, one of these bug hunter sites who found some really, really great bugs, and it's very well, these documents, very well documented the issues he found. And our goal was to knock out as many of these bugs as possible. And as you can see, we were able to do everything except one. And the one is an escaping floating bug, and it required a major re-architecture on our end, but we have it in the queue for future releases. So this one will also go away. So what do these bugs actually mean to you? So let me show you a little bit what types of bugs were included. One of the bugs in here is a double float margin bugs. So for example, if you had a left floating element and you would set a left margin of 100 pixels, IE6 out of sudden thought, wow, I'll make it 200 pixels. And it was very painful for the designers then to say, oh, okay, I need to apply actually some negative margin to kind of like work around, or you just use half of it. Well, in IE7, it's nicely fixed. We have now 100 pixels as we expected. One of the most famous bugs, I think, is the 3-pixel text jog. And this bug happened to if you had a left-floated element and you have to text against some borders. And we would always leave this little 3-pixel gap here. And you can specifically see it out here. As soon as the float stops, we would start rendering correctly. Major pain point for designers who actually would love their text to nicely align and not do like interesting jumpings back and forth. Well, obviously, now fixed in Internet Explorer 7. And now comes my absolute favorite bug, the so-called magic creeping bug. And I have to tell a little story around that. So just imagine IE6 being at MIX and partying really, really hard every other night. And the outcome of it, well, it got a little drunk and started to kind of side off the space and then boom, hit the wall. So this bug actually what happened through we also have some padding issues, and if you would repeat the padding issues, we've got sizing correction wrong, and then text would start to wander off. Now in IE7, we can party. We always keep nice with straight line. So I kind of like showed you what benefits to you are having all these bugs fixed, because it really eliminates some of these weirdnesses like, why the heck is Internet Explorer 6 doing these things? Besides focusing on position and everything, we did a tons of other bugs too. And I'm not going into too much detail into here because you see it's a big list and it's not even a final list here. What I want to get into is a fix we did around the overflow behavior. In IE6, if you would specify a height of 100 pixels or width of 100 pixels, there was no guarantee that your box would actually be that big. If the content would be larger than the box dimensions, the box would just magically grow. And here I have a little code sample where I actually have two boxes nested inside. The outer box has a little red border, and the box inside has an offset of the top box. And as you can see down left in IE6, the outer box would just grow, and I would never achieve the visual effect I actually wanted, which we see on the right side, where the two boxes actually nicely overlap. This has been fixed in Internet Explorer 7, and we're very proud of it because it was a big step. We had to do a lot of architectural changes to make this happen. Also, the beauty of this fix, it opened up a door for an additional feature we're proud to announce with a MIX build, which is the min-max with height feature, which I will talk about a little bit in a second. Thanks, Kevin. So talking about most requested standards features. Our first priority was to extend already standards implementation we have started in IE6. So, for example, now we enable hover on all elements, not just anchor. We do background attachment fixed on all elements, not just body. We improved our object fallback. Besides the enhancements, we also focused on the newest set of standards featured asked by you. And the top on the list was the ask for selectors, improved selector support. Selectors allow you to specify rules which then apply styles to elements defined by the selector rule. And it allows you a great way to shortcut the way how you apply styles, because you can come up with really complex rules to set your styles. And it also enables you to do very interesting dynamic effects. So we added support for first child, adjacent attribute, child selected. And we also implemented a couple of the CSS3 attribute selectors, because we were already in the code, and I'm part of the CSS working group, and I know this CSS3 selector spec is very stable. So it was just a natural transition to add these as well. As I mentioned before, we now have min-max with height in the builds. So it allows you to build very fluid layouts. For example, if you are dependent on resizing of your window, you can adjust the box sizes based on that. We have now support in for fixed positioning, as I mentioned before, and of course, alpha transparent PNG support. So let me show you a little bit these standards features in action and what they can help you in your page design. Let's talk a little bit about fixed positioning. So what I have here is an alpha transparent Flash object, which I fixed positioned on the top of my page. And you can think of fixed positioning just pretty much stamping an element on the page, and it will never move independent of scroll movements. So if I have content underneath, and I start scrolling, you can see the rich experience still is in the side of the customer. And I can still read the content underneath. Like what normally would have taken several lines of JavaScript to write, and if you do it in JavaScript, you get this little jerky behavior because it needs to catch up with your scroll movements. Here, what was necessary was only a simple property to make this work. The next feature I want to talk about in a little more detail is alpha transparent PNGs. With that, I want to show you a demo done by Marcus Silvians. And what you see here are three alpha transparent images: the sun, the eagle, and the shadow of the eagle. They're only three pictures, and they have a certain transparency value set to them. So that way I can achieve that the sun, for example, overlaps the eagle, while the eagle's shadow overlaps the mountains. I mean, you can already see in the minds of the designer, like, oh my God, what possibilities are now available on the web? And you will see a drastic, once we ship IE7, a drastic improve on fidelity on the web pages using alpha transparent PNGs. The next demo I want to show is about background attachment fixed on all elements. And there, I could not think of a better demo than done by Eric Meyer. And here is this famous complex distorted spiral demo. And what I point your attention to is this line up here. Because as you see, above here, this little glass-like look appears. You might think, well, it's easy. I can just apply a regular PNG background image and I'm done. But watch out. Watch this line up here when I scroll. So you can see the glass look actually moves with it. And this is done all declaratively without any JavaScript. So again, very rich view in a declarative way across all browsers. And last but not least, as I mentioned before, hover on all elements. So what I have here is just a simple menu defining certain time periods, Renaissance, Art Nouveau, Modern, Postmodern, Digital, and a set of artists to them. When I hover over them, I get dynamic effects. You ask, what's the big deal? I can do this in a couple lines of JavaScript, no problem. The beauty of this approach is that the content, or the actual menu, are only done to unsorted lists and list elements. There is no presentation here at all. And the whole presentation is done through CSS, and the dynamic behavior is done through hover on the unsorted list elements. So I showed you a little more detail, like what capabilities do you have at your fingertips now when you design pages. So besides putting in rich UI capabilities in Internet Explorer 7, we also added more support to make your sites more interesting. The first one, an obvious one to mention, is native. We have now support for native XML HTTP. And this is a great feature because it allows you to use AJAX-type applications independent of your ActiveX settings. If you want to support IE6 and below, there's still a little script you can write to bring in the ActiveX control on demand. The next item I want to mention is high assurance SSL certificates. And if you had a chance to see the keynote, Dean was kind of like talking about it a little bit, and yesterday in Rob Franco's talk, he was going into more detail. The key takeaway here is with high assurance SSL, you have a great way to make your site light up in a positive way in Internet Explorer 7. This gives a way to my mom to have a real trust relationship with you and your business. The next point I want to mention is RSS integration in Internet Explorer 7. I hope you had a chance to watch the talk of Walter this morning, where he went a little more detail around the RSS platform. The only thing I want to touch on here is if your page has an RSS feed on it, it will automatically light up in Internet Explorer by having this little orange button on that. And for the user, it's then very straightforward to just subscribe to your site. And you can be connected with your customers through RSS, even though the customer is actually not on your site anymore. And you can still feed him updates on what's going on and what's cool on your site. Just another way to be really greatly connected with your customers. The same is true for OpenSearch. So we're now supporting OpenSearch 1.1 standard. Dean also showed a little demo in the keynote on Monday around that. Again, if you have like a search provider in your page and your customer comes to your page, a little blue icon will light up. And he can then choose your site to be the search, his search provider. And then he can easily, within the Chrome of Internet Explorer, start searching on your page. So that's another way how you easily connect to your customers through Internet Explorer. So I talked a little bit about like how we prioritized, what fixes and features we did. Let me talk a little bit about what you can do to prepare your pages for Internet Explorer. So whenever we do changes to our platform, even in the sense of improving standard support, there is the risk of breaking pages. And app compatibility we take very, very seriously. In IE6, for example, we introduced a way for you to opt into a so-called strict mode or compliant mode, or in a so-called quirks mode or compatibility mode. So you can decide in which mode you run your pages in. In compatibility mode, we will not change rendering behavior since the IE5 days. That also means that we probably not be able to implement all the newest features because, for example, fixed positioning require behavioral changes. So for IE7, we added to Quirks mode colon hover on all elements and alpha transparent PNG support. But we couldn't do, for example, any of the fixes I just showed you because we don't know if there's actually customer relying on some of these behaviors in building their pages. In strict mode, on the other hand, we give you the promise that we're trying to be as standard compliant as possible. And that means that we will update our engine on regular intervals if we discover bugs or if there are standards changes to be as compliant as possible. We totally understand that this will probably incur some pain points in the short term, but I truly believe that the long-term benefit for authoring once and run everywhere will outweigh the pain points you currently face in updating your pages. We're also here to help you. So we had the compatibility lab here at MIX, and I think it's still open till 3 o'clock. So you're more than welcome to stop by and have your pages checked out and see if they render correctly in Internet Explorer. And if not, we're more than welcome to help you identify what's going on and what easily you can do. I will also talk a little bit now about the most common breaks and mitigation strategies. Also, we have some tools available, and I will demo you some of them, what you can use to easily identify bugs and breaks and fix them. And we also have great documentation up on MSDN, which help you in your development of an update of IE7 pages. So we still see a lot of breakage on the internet due to hard-coded user agent strings. We really would like to discourage everyone from using them because I think locking out any other browser versions is, in general, a bad idea. And it also hits, whenever a new version comes around, it will also not be recognized and will be blocked. If you feel you have to use the user strings for whatever reasons ever, please then at least consider a greater equal switch rather than an equal switch. But most likely, the security vulnerabilities, or the security didn't get worse in a new release. It most likely got better. So the rendering behavior didn't change that drastically with a new release. So your chances that your pages are actually still work in a new release are very, very high. And therefore, you actually have an easier progression when newer versions come out. The second point I want to touch on was the overflow fix we did. We still see a lot of sites which actually relied on the wrong behavior of Internet Explorer 6. So when in your page, if you see text now start overlapping other text, that is most likely due to the new correctly overflow behavior. But luckily, the fix for that is very easy. You can either use the min, height, width properties to apply to automatically grow the size to grow the box to the right size, or you can just give the correct box size, because that also will work perfectly down level in IE6, and it will render your page correctly. I also want to mention the XML prologue bug fix we did. In Internet Explorer 6, if you try to build a strict XHTML page, the spec requires to put in an optional put in an XML version tag. And we had a bug in Internet Explorer 6. If the doc type switch is not on the first line, we would ignore it and would automatically fall into Quirks mode. So we have that fixed for Internet Explorer 7, so you can use correctly the XML doc type. The problem is we're still encountering a lot of pages which intended to be in strict mode, but built the whole pages actually in Quirks mode. And now they break due to that fix. So if you know a person who got broken due to this, it's a very easy recommendation you can do. If you target IE only, well, then just remove the doc type. Because realistically, you already built your page in a non-strict way to begin with. If you, most likely, you wanted to target other browsers as well, you want to run in strict mode. And there, sadly, you have to update your pages because the box model is quite different between Quirks mode and the strict rendering mode. So I talked with you a little bit about what fixes we did, what new features we added, but sadly, these collide now with the so-called CSS hacks. And CSS hacks are selector rules, which rely on parser bugs or not yet implemented features to target certain versions of browsers. And this is a complete workaround on the community because it's none of the browsers today is 100% CSS 2.1 compliance. And they are rendering difference across the board. And these filters help to kind of like eliminate the pain. The biggest problem with them is they're very likely to break from release to release because, well, we're fixing parser bugs, and new features most likely will be implemented at some point in time. So here's a couple set of examples of CSS hacks which broke in Internet Explorer 7. A very famous one is the so-called star HTML selector rule. And this relied on an IE parser bug and was therefore only applied as CSS rules to Internet Explorer. The next is the underscore hack, which similar was only parsed by Internet Explorer by no other browsers. All other browsers would throw out that rule. Hide comment bug was the exact opposite. All other browsers would understand it, except IE. We would throw it out. And the last one is the HTML child selector body hack, which relied on the child selector not being implemented in Internet Explorer 6. So now in Internet Explorer 7, we have it implemented, so that hack will break. We totally agree that in an ideal world, no hacks are necessary. And we actually noticed that with all the fixes we did in the platform, a lot of sites actually, even though the hacks broke, still rendered correctly because we actually fixed the underlying issue while the hack was needed. But as I mentioned before, the world is not perfect. We're still not all on exactly the same level with all browsers across the board. So if you're looking for a way to provide selective style sheets based on a versioning mechanisms, we would recommend that you consider conditional comments. Conditional comments is an HTML construct we introduced in IE5. So it will be ignored by all other browsers. And it allows you to target certain versions of IE. And it also has a very rich expression language in it. So you can say less than, equal, greater than, and so on. And what we would recommend is, if you use this conditional comment construct, that you actually pull out all the style sheets you have to give to Internet Explorer separately in an own style sheet, like in the IE styles, for example. This way, it makes it very easy for you to maintain it. If the future version of Internet Explorer comes out, we fixed more issues, you can then just immediately pull that file and everything is okay. And it's also easy searchable for you because, well, you know the construct, exactly how it looks, it's very well documented, we will support it moving forward, so you know exactly what to look for. One of the problems we're facing with customers with all these hacks is that they even forget that they put them in because they have all these weird constructs, so it's very, very difficult to actually find them in the fact once they break. I also want to give a little bit more background information about the most famous hack we broke, the so-called Holly hack. And the Holly hack relied on two bugs. The first one was a star HTML hack I already talked about. And the second one was the incorrect overflow behavior. The hack would apply a height of 1%, so very small height, and would rely on us to automatically grow to whatever the content size of that element was. The real intention of the Holly hack was to force an internal data structure on that element. And this is the so-called has layout data structure. We internally use the has layout data structure to force sizing and positioning information on an element. Certain set of elements need to have that. For example, images. An image has always an intrinsic height and width. Therefore, it always has a fixed set of rectangular space it needs to place somewhere on your web page. So therefore, it needs to know about its resizing and positioning information. The problem is why people used has layout is that other elements, like relative position elements, should actually be positioned based on the information of their parents and not from themselves. And sadly, Internet Explorer 6 sometimes got a little bit confused when doing these calculations. And sometimes the measurement information wouldn't actually arrive at that element. So forcing head layout on relative position elements would work around a lot of these inconsistencies I kind of like showed you beforehand. I wrote an article in conjunction with the Web Standards project to kind of like shed a little bit more light around what does has layout actually mean, what elements have layouts, and also what side effects do has layouts actually have if you use it in your page, because there are some side effects to it. So what can you do now in your pages? So in IE6, you can still use holyhack. It's no problem, because in IE7, the hack is broken anyway, so therefore it won't get applied. Since we're not perfect, we probably still have some bugs in our code bags. If you run into an issue where you still feel you need a has layout to work around problems in Internet Explorer 7, we would recommend that you use conditional comments in conjunction with a zoom1 property. The zoom1 property is a proprietary property we introduced in IE55, and what it will do, a zoom1 will pretty much zoom an element to 100%, therefore will not change the content size at all. That's the only property I know of that will not change in any way the layout of your elements, but still force the has layout data structure on it in case you need it. So let me show you a little bit about what tools you have available to identify your pages. Because ideally, this should just be a very straightforward process, and you shouldn't sit there with a crystal ball and trying to figure out, oh my God, what happened there? So let me show you what is available to you. So here I have a page in IE7, and it rendered correctly in Internet Explorer 6, which means there were actually like 3 nice columns. And for some reason in Internet Explorer 7, this column kind of like got shifted from the right side over other content. So what happened here? So the first thing we can do is call up a tool, the so-called expression finder. It's part of your MIX package, and we will also post it on the web. What the expression finder will do is we can point it to an XML style sheet, and there we can give it a certain list of strings or expressions to look for. And we fed this XML stream with all CSS hacks we know we broke with Internet Explorer 7. So what I can do now, point this to my demo page and have it perform a scan. And the beauty of this is that it also, in the expression finder, you can give it also a whole list of files. So if you have a domain with several pages on them, you can just feed them in one big rush, and it will just search through everything and give you the results. So hey, the scanning is complete, and coincidentally, I have here the result. And what we see is, wow, on this page, there are 3 instances of star HTML on it, 2 instances of the holyhack. So, that's probably most likely where the page broke in Internet Explorer 7. So let's take a look how we can fix this. So first, before I go into the source code, let me show you another tool. We have now published, like I think a couple months ago, an Internet Explorer developer toolbar. And this is available also for free for download. And as part of the Internet Explorer, we have a rich DOM Explorer. And here we have a feature called select element by click. So now I go my page and kind of say, oh, no, that's not it. Who's the parents box of that column? Oh, that's actually X side 2. So now let's change who's a parent of X side 2. Oh, that's X main content. Okay, so somewhere between X main content and X side 2, something went wrong. So it gives us another hint where to look for what went wrong. So now we kind of open up the page, we look in the style sheet. We have to scroll a little bit down. And indeed, we find around X main, star HTML hack, height 1%, holyhack. We know it's broken in Internet Explorer 7. Well, that's a problem. So now we have like 2 choices. We could still leave the hack in there to render it for IE6 and try to something different for IE7, or we can just try to maintain everything easily through conditional comments. So I'll just get rid of this little statement here. And I open up my HTML. And in here, I will just copy-paste a conditional comment. And that conditional comment, oops, got a little bit messed up here. Just pretty much say, hey, if you're Internet Explorer, go off to that extra style sheet and apply that style to that element. And here's the extra style sheet I'm calling. And here I'm just pretty much targeting xmain again and apply the zoom property I just talked about. So let's see what happens. Let's turn off. And ta-da, page is fixed. So it's very easy, very straightforward. Even though we still had to use hex here in this scenario, it's now easier maintainable. And in a future version, once we actually address this bug as well, you can just easily take out the conditional comment, the extra style sheet will not be loaded, and everything is clean in your page. Oops. So I just showed you what tools you have at your fingertips to easily find these issues, and I also showed you a little bit workaround what you can do to actually help you get into the stage you were back in with Internet Explorer 6. So what's next for Internet Explorer? The key thing I wanted to emphasize at this stage is, with the release of the MIX build, we actually locked down our layout behavior. At some point, we had to say, even though we did a lot of fixes, we know there's more fixes we can do. We just have to lock it down so you guys can go out and prepare your pages once the beta 2 comes around of Vista, once we actually ship the product. And then we will do another revision where we do more bug fixes, add more features with the next release of Internet Explorer. And I would love to hear your feedback at the end of this discussion, what features you actually would like to see in the future releases of Internet Explorer. We also know fully that we're not done yet. We know in IE7 there's no support for display tables, there's no support for generated contents, but it's on the list, and we're fully committed to get there. The key point which I want to make here, and I'm very happy to announce, is that we're actually working on a public bug database where you guys can submit your issues, you can track your issues, and once we fix them in our internal builds, you see them closed out. This is a great way you guys can help us improving the engine, and we can actually see which bugs you actually care about. You can expect a blog post about the location of the public bug database in the next couple of days on the IE blog. So one of the key features or feedbacks we receive from you is, please update your standards compliance. We listened, but we can only do this together. We're kind of like the web developer community and us as a browser vendor are in a boat together because we both serve, in the end, another customer, which are the end users. And the end users really don't like broken pages. They really get itchy about that. So the only way we can, as a browser vendor, drive the web forward is through your guys' help. If you actually go out and update your pages and get them ready for Internet Explorer 7. We also have an alias, IE7, where you can send us feedback. If you have problems with bugs or if you have problems on your page, please send them to us. We're here to help you. We also have great documentation up on msdn.com. As I mentioned before, here at MIX, we have the compatibility lab where you can check your pages where we work with. I think they're open till 3 o'clock today. And we will also have another chat with IE experts, like I think right after this talk, where you can go and just ask your questions directly. After MIX, Dev Center is a great way for resources, IE blog I mentioned, and our feedback alias for IETEL. With that, I'd like to thank you, everyone, and open the room for questions. Andy, go for it.
I've got more than one.
Well, then I need to take notes.
We were very, very glad to see Microsoft dropping support for what was once the wonderful IE5 for the Mac. How quickly can we expect you to drop support for 5 and 5.5 at least, and encourage all users not to use it in the same way that you did with IE5 for the Mac? My first question.
So just to introduce, Dave is part of our object model program management team.
Yeah, so I'm Dave Massey. I work with Marcus and Chris and everybody else. Internet Explorer 5.5 for Windows is actually out of support as of a couple of months ago, I think now. Along with Windows Millennium Edition, which it shipped by default with, that's no longer supported. IE 5.0 is currently still supported. It's in extended support for Windows 2000 because IE 5.0 shipped with Windows 2000. We have to continue to support that operating system in extended support. So we'll continue to support the versions of IE with the operating systems that they shipped with, and certainly we want to actually fade out support because it's a nightmare for the team to actually have to do critical updates, not just for every different version, but for all the languages of the different versions as well. I think the follow-on question was how quickly are we going to expect to sort of lose IE6? Well, IE6 actually shipped with Windows XP, so we're going to continue to support that on Windows XP, certainly through its extended support period. We're going to heavily promote Internet Explorer 7 out on the web. We want everybody to upgrade to it. Will it be a mandatory update? Probably not, because it is a functionality upgrade for people, and if somebody overnight suddenly gets an automatic update and they wake up and their browser's all different, certainly people like my dad tend to freak out a little bit. But we will be encouraging people to update, and hopefully that everybody here can encourage their users to update as well, and we can move the internet forward.
My second question is, you've obviously done us a great favour in fixing CSS support and doing all the great work, but you've left me with a real problem. In that I used to refer to modern browsers and then IE. Now, I think you'd probably like me to refer to IE7 as a modern browser. So what can you recommend that I call previous versions now? What's the nomenclature?
Oh, it's an excellent question. I would just call it IE Legacy. Does it answer your question? Molly?
My question's on printing. We saw the demo the other day where there was a zoom feature that would allow you to get the full width in. In the CSS spec, there's also definitions for page breaks and page orientation. Has that been fixed in IE7, or is it on the queue?
Very, very good question, too. So around printing, since coincidentally I'm also responsible for printing, so I can answer you this question very well. Our roadmap around printing was in 3 steps. The first step was pretty much get the default experience right. So if I print a page, I don't want to lose any form of content. And the shrink to fit, which was demoed on the Monday keynote, was part of that experience, where we kind of like started stopping, cropping stuff on the right side. We also put some improvements in there around if you try to print a 2-page document and you only have like a 1-liner on the second page, we'll automatically shrink a page to save paper. So just little features like that. So that was the first one, get the content right. The second feature, the second part of the roadmap is bring end users into control of their printing experience. For that, you notice in the UI of the new print preview, there are now the capabilities of live margin sliders. The user can like easily switch between portrait and landscape mode if stuff doesn't fit. They can set custom resize settings. So that was a second step. The third step is putting the developer into control. And sadly, we haven't gotten to that in Internet Explorer 7. But it's part of our roadmap, it's part of our plan, and we'll get to it in the future release. That will include support for the CSS printing you just mentioned. But we're also thinking about what other features we can put in there to bring developers in more control of the print output. Because we totally recognize there's a whole market around printing barcodes, for example, or like on airports. and to get that right as well.
Thank you.
Molly.
Let's see, two clarifications and a comment. First clarification in response to your solution for the star HTML Holly hack issue. Using the conditional comment and the zoom, that will also handle it in IE6 and below. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So you can just get rid of the star HTML hack completely and replace it with that conditional comment
that is
if
correct.
you're so inclined. Okay. The second clarification had to do with the XML prologue issue, specifically the XML declaration. Can you clarify? I think I didn't quite understand what you were saying in relation to that. In XHTML strict and XHTML 1.1, in each of those cases, the XML prologue, in XML in general, is recommended but not required. It isn't required to be there, which has been sort of a blessing for us because with the particular problem in IE6, we've been able to avoid, you know, a compliance issue, a validation issue, and use the doc type declaration with nothing above it. So I'm a little unclear as to why that was on that particular slide, and I mean, it just doesn't seem like it's an issue. You either use it because you can use it now, or you don't based on your own issues, not validation or compliance.
Thank you for asking that question. I think the more problem with the XML prologue is not so much if it's required or not required, is it available for copy-paste? Because a lot of people, when they were building XHTML pages, they were just like copying, pasting the whole declarations and were using it. And not even thinking of, oh, I actually can take this off, and then now I'm in strict mode and actually make it work. I think that's what we're mostly seeing on the web. Also, what we're seeing is that a lot of tools automatically generate it. And then the author doesn't bother to actually go in and remove it based on that. So thanks for asking that question.
Yeah, absolutely. So at this point, there's no problem, whether it's there or not.
Yeah.
But anything else, let's say if there's a comment above the XML declaration, does that cause a problem?
Also, good question. I think to my knowledge today, this still will cause a problem.
Okay.
We still have that bug.
No comments, nothing above it. Except
nothing above except the XML prologue and then the doc type declaration.
So white space would be okay. That's not going to be a problem. Okay. So thank you for that clarification, Marcus. I appreciate that. And then finally, this is a political issue that I just want to toss at you, not so much because it's a political issue for me, but because of being group lead for the Web Standards Project, it sort of falls on my shoulders to ask questions of this nature. Your recommendation and Microsoft's recommendation in almost all cases when it refers to hacks is to go to conditional comments, which of course in the document are just fine. There's no problem there, no validation or compliance errors or issues. But in that CSS file, which I totally agree with you, by the way, on the whole surgical correction kind of concept where you put the specific IE stuff in its own CSS so that you can remove it as time goes on. But all that said, the reality is we're still looking at proprietary code in there. That is not valid. That is a compliance issue, and that goes against the heart and spirit of the web standards ideologies. So what would you say to the community that is highly critical of conditional comments and does not want to take that tack because they see it as a vote for proprietary Microsoft technology and against the web, which is a true issue?
So we really, I totally agree that conditional comments is just another way of approaching the issue outside of the WCC standards. So are the CSS hacks to begin with. Even though they validate, I would say they were never intended by the WCC to be used that way. So the bigger question is, like, can we work with the WCC to actually come up with the versioning mechanisms in the space of CSS to make that happen? And I think we also brought this to the WCC back in October, and we will still bring up the issue again, and we would love to have the feedback from WASP to the WCC to help us drive this issue into the standard.
So you're saying that some of the code, some of the CSS, some of the properties that you're using within conditional comments, you'd like to see actually brought into the specs? Is that what you're asking for?
No, we actually would love to see a version mechanism similar to conditional comments using CSS syntax. So you can do it with completely.
You can do this with specified.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
So you can think of like a colon version selector, for example, or you can see an add media or add page version, for example.
Gotcha. And what was the pushback on that, or it was just never taken through the conversation?
No, we started the conversation with the WCC. There was a lot of resistance from other browser vendors, so we just need to overcome that pretty much.
Thanks, Marcus. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I'd just like to add two requests, one for data URLs and the other for separating updates to the rendering engine from updates to functionality so that rendering engine updates can be critical.
That is a very interesting point, especially the updating to the rendering engine. Because one of the struggle we're having with is obviously app compatibility. So when we do updates to rendering engine, and this might require like behavioral changes, we cannot just easily do this in like a critical update, for example. Because we need to prepare the community first to be able to, they can update their pages when we actually release this update. So that's why we actually tend to do this in regular release cycles, so we give the community a way to update their pages beforehand. Any more questions? If not, then I'd like to thank you for being here, and hopefully see you all at the chat MIX.